Do an introduction first, or will I just launch straight in?
We can do. I don't know how many people are familiar with the pod project, but we're just doing what we call the lockdown files at the moment on different topics. So we're trying one a week. Sometimes there's 2 a week, depending on what we've got to fit in. And coming up, we've got sourdough, making sourdough. I've just booked that in, and then also a lot of discussion about building your own wind turbine, because that's something I'm obsessed with, and bee conservation. So yeah, so we're just doing the lockdown files because we thought it would be really nice to take advantage of everybody being around a bit more, and that we could actually introduce people from all over the country rather than just being really limited to our location. And then we thought we'd ask Lucy, because I have been following her on Facebook, and yeah, and I know we have some mutual friends, so they have recommended you as well, and I've been really looking forward to this talk. So over to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Marianne. Yeah, just want to begin by welcoming you all. Starting to get strangely used to all these floating heads on my screen. And yeah, it's been really amazing actually. This time I've been able to do lots of online classes, and I've just been really blown away by the power of technology and the power to create sacred spaces online. It's been really, really special. So pleasantly surprised by somebody who is quite often very anti new technology. I'm growing to get used to it. So yeah, thanks very much for joining me, and thank you, Marianne, for hosting me and asking me to be a part of this. So I always love to begin with some gratitude. It's a very important practice in my life now, and I'd love to invite you to join me in a centering practice as well. So if it feels comfortable to you, if it's available to you, you can stand up for this, but very easy to do sitting down as well. So yeah, I'll just begin by expressing gratitude for all of you for being here. Yeah, gratitude for the rose bush outside my door. Been having a really lovely relationship with it since all of the roses started to come out, and all of the bees and the flies and the pollinators that are visiting it every day. And feeling extremely grateful for my body and for this time and space to really land back into my body. Yeah. So I'll just invite you, if it feels good for you, to close your eyes, and just wherever you find yourself, just bring your attention to your feet for a moment and notice where your body makes contact with the earth. So whether that's your feet on the ground or your bum in the seat, just noticing what it feels like where you meet the earth. And I invite you just to breathe in deeply with me. So we're going to breathe in for 5, nice and slow. And just pause at the top gently. And then gently, gradually breathing out for 5 as well. And we'll do that a couple more times together. Breathing in, feeling that vital force filling up our lungs. As we breathe out, just noticing anywhere in our body where there might be any tension. Breathing deeply into those places. And just as you gently open your eyes, I'd like to invite you just to come into what's known as wide-angled vision. We call it owl eyes a lot when we're teaching outside, but I'll stand up for this, but you're welcome to stay seated. So what you're going to do is just bring your hands out in front of you and keep your gaze fixed ahead. And then very gently bring your fingers out and keeping your gaze fixed in front. You're just going to notice when you cannot see your fingers anymore. So just really stretching that wide angle vision. And noticing now how much more you might be able to see in your horizontal vision. And when you're happy with that, we can also do it from center, from sky to ground. Again, just keeping our eyes in front and testing those edges. And then just where you're seated or standing, just taking in the sphere of vision that you're able to see without moving your eyes. And taking another moment just to breathe really deeply in this moment. Thank you for joining me in that. That's as much for you as it is for me and my nerves doing this. And yeah, like it's such an incredible practice just to engage with our wide-angled vision. Something that our ancestors would have been very familiar with, moving through natural spaces, and that awareness as a survival tool. Like our society and our dominant culture right now puts so much focus on hyper-focused vision, whether it's reading off a book, off a screen, focusing on one person when they're talking, when actually our brain functions so much better, our nervous systems are so much healthier when we step into this like wide-angled vision state and just breathe very deeply. So that's something that's been getting me through this time. So just to introduce myself and my work. So my name is Lucy O'Hagan. I'm a rewilder. I'm an ancestral skills teacher. I'm a rites of passage guide, and I'm a forest school practitioner. And it's not always in that order. Can mix up many times depending on who I'm talking to or what the feel of the day is. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. So I've prepared a little slideshow of pictures, and I have a little video in the middle to show you all. So hopefully you can all see this. And I'm gonna play it. So that's me. So this photo was taken at a, let me see if I can bring this down so I can see some more of you. No, it's okay. All right. So this was taken up in the north of Finland very recently. I did it was my first full Stone Age project with some members of my community. So we were a group of 12 with one very cute reindeer skin clad 2-year-old. And we were living outside. There's a Stone Age museum there at a place called Kiriki Stone Age Centre. So we were there for 1 week, living in their birch bark huts and eating lots of reindeer and wild food that we'd gathered throughout the year. And yeah, just seeing what it felt like to live in this way and to live as a community. So hopefully you can tell from my sparkly face in this photo that it was a very good week. It was very fun. So yeah, my organisation is called Wild Awake, and it's been running since about 2015. I first set up the forest school in Dublin's Phoenix Park in 2015, and then as a result of further studies, which I'll talk about, I set up Wild Awake. And my mission with Wild Awake is to rekindle cultural and environmental resilience through the relearning of ancestral and traditional skills in nature. So, there we go. So I'd love to share this poem with you, which is something that's been really guiding me at the moment. It's called The Way It Is by William Stafford. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. So yeah, I'd love to begin by sharing a little bit about my thread that I'm following, and use that as a way to leap on to what is rewilding and practices that we can all incorporate into our lives if we want to rewild our lives more. Just to note, that thread that's there is some reindeer sinew from the back strap of a reindeer, so it's what we would use for sewing and for binding, like arrows, and it's very strong stuff. It's what our ancestors would have been sewing with. Okay, so a little bit of an introduction to myself. I was born in Belfast, and when I was about 8 years old, we moved to Ballynahinch, which is not far from the pod project, actually. It's in County Down. And I was looking for a photograph of myself at this time, which would have been massively embarrassing, but I didn't find one in time, so I chose instead a picture of hazelnuts. So when we lived in Ballynahinch, you know, it wasn't a very happy time. It wasn't a very safe childhood. But we lived in the middle of the countryside, and there was a hazel tree that was surrounded by a fairy ring. And it was the place that I went to all the time when I needed to feel safe. And yeah, it's kind of like a running theme in my life now that nature is the place that I go to when I need some support and when I need to feel safe. So I'm so grateful that I have that connection, and always feel so honoured and privileged to share that connection with other people. So yeah, I guess like as you grow older, and I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with this, that you know, like you have things in your childhood that you're really passionate about, and then, you know, kind of hit the teenage years, and it's really interesting for me as a rites of passage guide now to kind of explore more the adolescent brain and the way that our society treats adolescents, and how, you know, as adolescents we have this amazing power, and we have this power of questioning the status quo. We have this amazing energy, and so often people put it down to like hormones or grumpy teenagers, when like in actual fact we have like, yeah, we're going through this incredible transition. And when that power is harnessed, we can really step into being in our true nature, to serving our community, to being really aware of our soul's gift. But rarely happens in the absence of rites of passage in our society now. So often people will experience what I experienced, which is you lose that thread, you know, you lose that thing that makes you happy. And for me, that was just manifest in, yeah, just exploring drink and drugs and loads of anxiety and depression, and just feeling very physically and emotionally and spiritually unwell, really. So that kind of went on until I was about 24, I guess. And then I somehow, by, yeah, I don't know, by what power, but I rediscovered nature. Actually, I do know, because it was like I was home brewing a lot, and then I realized that I could go out foraging for free ingredients, so maybe that was the segue back into it. But in any case, it was 2014 that I discovered forest school. So this top left hand picture of me on the birch tree is during my forest school training, and in that training I just felt like this reawakening of myself, and that reconnection to my true path and my true purpose. Yeah, it was a really magical moment. And there's actually a video of me from that time. They interviewed me at the end of the training, and it's like almost embarrassing how excited I am, but it's totally encapsulates like exactly how I was feeling at that time. So yeah, I did the forest school training, which was a 9-month-long training, and as soon as I finished that, I set up the forest school in the Phoenix Park, and was just so hungry for more. Was just knew this was it, you know. So I found a school in Sussex called the Woodcraft School. So that's down in the bottom left-hand corner. That was my first ever bow drill fire. And if any of you have ever done bow drill or like lit a fire in any way, yeah, you understand like the elation and joy that you feel, and exhaustion that somehow disappears magically in the moment of blowing that bundle into flame. So yeah, I studied there for 2 years. I did a 10-month-long bushcraft leadership course, a 9-month-long ethnobotany course, and then found wildlife tracking. So I suppose to this day, like tracking and plants are my 2 biggest love, along with tanning as well, insofar as skills go. So yeah, it's kind of like the thread is still in my hands, and it's ever expanding, and I'm really delighted that although the forest school isn't happening right now, I have such an immense support from my community, of the community of people who have come to my school or who work at the school. Just feels like a very strong, resilient community, and it feels like at the moment there's so many people who are coming to this path, especially after the current crisis, and understanding that the importance and the power of nature. So I really hope that we see more forest schools and more nature-based therapies appearing in Ireland over these next coming years. So where are we going now? Okay. Oh yeah, I'm going to show you a video. So the weird thing is I can't see my new share. Sorry, my mouse has actually disappeared, so I can't see where I'm. There's always something, Marianne.
Don't be worrying. We're well used to this now.
Oh, there it is. It came back. Okay, so I'm going to show you a video, which is from a 1-month immersion that I did in France, with links filled in. So yeah, I suppose at the end of that journey, you know, I'd spent a lot of time in Sussex learning, and it was very bushcraft orientated. It was amazing information, and there was amazing connections formed, but there was very little soul in the work. And I met a woman called Lynx Vilden. If you're not familiar with her, she's incredible, and I would strongly suggest that you check her out. And yeah, it was kind of I did a week-long class with her over in Galway, and at the end of that class I just completely realized that all of these skills that I had been learning meant nothing if I didn't have a community to share them with. Yeah, so it was a really profound realization for me at the time. And just after that, then she does these like long-term immersions for people into Stone Age skills and communal, like nature-based living. So this is a video of us spending 1 month in a place called Les Izzy, which is kind of like the epicenter of prehistory in Europe. So it's where caves like Fond de Gomme and Lascaux are. So cave art from 40,000 years ago. So it's a place that's really like so powerful. So we were living under a rock, which you'll see in this video called Rock Simon. So I'll stop talking and let you watch the video.
chestnut trees, damp leaves, frost flies in.
To live without walls for 1 month, to just cook on a fire, to wash in streams, to walk barefoot and connecting with these strong places and our roots, our origins.
Layered in rock, layered in time, what's lost in one realm is found in mine. Graceful curves carved in limestone ceiling, painted beasts in caves revealing. At his feet I speak his name. Mammut, Mammut, Mammut. At his feet I speak his name. Mammut, Mammut, Mammut.
We made pots out of clay that we went together in a cave, where you have to really crawl in, and you just take it in, bring your bowl, come out. And then you realize, okay, so this is the whole process. This is the full story of taking something from the ground and starting then to create an object that you can use, an object that is so useful.
Wise one, he listens, recounting our history. Bring me a spotted horse with no saddle. Bring me a wooden boat with no paddle. The mammoth smiles his secret smile. The shaman walks his 100th mile. Oh, bring me a spotted horse with no tether. Bring me a wooden boat in unsettled weather. Watch me ride the wild wind with no fears. So watch me sail the rugged waves for 1,000,000 years. Layered in rock, layered in time. What's lost in one realm is found in mine. Graceful curves carved in limestone ceiling, painted beasts in caves revealing. At his feet I.
It was discoveries, it was new things, it was inside stuff, it was fun and laughter and the beauty of this land.
At his feet I speak his name. Mammut.
I taking songs with me and stories and time for thanks, time for grief. I want to integrate this in my everyday life.
Mammut, Mammut. Bring me a spotted horse with no saddle.
Give me a moment, technical issues. You still with me? There we go. Okay. So yeah, that stirs up loads of really big emotions for me watching that, but I'll keep going. So yeah, like I think Abra captured it really well in the last phrases that she was saying, that, you know, it was a time for singing, a time for stories, a time for grief, a time for gratitude. And like for me, that like that's such a huge part of what rewilding is around, is learning these things that we're able to integrate into our daily life. yeah, like also important to remember like who we are and where we've come from. And there's a graph. There's a graph here. So yeah, just taking a moment to look at that and to see like we have, you know, Homo sapiens, so our species just coming in at the very end there. So, you know, evolved in Africa 300,000 years ago and began to spread out at least 100,000 years ago, and like it's changing all the time as we learn more and as our technologies develop. But we're the sole surviving species left in this diverse family tree. And yeah, in the past 10,000 years that civilization has begun, so since the Neolithic, like through farming, and really like it was 10,000 years ago that our love affair with control began. Before that, we were hunting, we were gathering, we were living with the land. So yeah, I think I'm doing this online class about rewilding at the moment, and it's been really interesting to think about the myths that proliferate around like who our ancestors were and how they lived. And we have a little bingo card of, you know, myths of prehistory. So, you know, that our ancestors were aggressive, that our ancestors were sexist, that our ancestors lived to like a really young age, that they were dirty, that they spoke in grunts, and I just don't believe it, you know. I just see how long we've lived, you know, for millennia on the earth in a more harmonious way. And even looking to indigenous groups, because, you know, like when we talk about civilization, and this isn't like the one human story, you know, it's the story of Western civilization, and there are lots of indigenous groups that still live in reciprocity with the earth, or at least try to. And if we look at examples from the Kalahari, the Bushmen, or the Hadza, you know, they spend only like less than 19 hours a week working, and they have so much time for leisure and for sleeping. And yeah, so there's lots of things that are kind of proliferated in modern culture about our ancestors, but it's good to think about like the ways that were good that we lived on this earth. So having said all of that, in the short space of time where we have been farming, where we have been since the Industrial Revolutions happened, we've changed so much in such little time. And we now know that we're living through the sixth mass extinction. Scientists estimate that the current rate of species extinction is at least 100 times, sometimes 1,000, sometimes 10,000 greater than it would be without human intervention. And we're really experiencing the really drastic effects of human negative impact on the earth, and like food and water scarcity, soil erosion, climatic events, competition for resources. Yeah, it's really heavy stuff. And it's something that we all feel, it's something that we're all very aware of, I'm sure, if we're coming to this discussion. And the importance of restoring our wild spaces, the importance of like increasing biodiversity, and yeah, can really only hope and do what we can do. So figure that these are really depressing things to talk about, so it's important to take a moment to look at some baby otters. That's what I like to do. So here's some baby otters for you. They're very cute and fluffy. Yeah, it's good in these moments to take a breath and to remember that we're not inherently flawed. You know, as a species, we are not inherently bad. We have the capacity to be good and have lived on this earth for millennia without destroying it. Yeah, so it's good to see ourselves in this context and remember that we are a part of nature and we can act as such, and we can develop our resilience and our capacity to adapt to these times as well. So that's why it's really important to look at baby otter pictures to kind of remind yourself of the beauty in the world. And yeah. So there's something that I would love to bring up, and full disclosure, I am not an expert in this subject, but it feels totally remiss for me to talk about rewilding now without bringing up our nervous system. And it's something that's been really useful for me in, yeah, like reconnecting to the wild inside myself, and to understand why I might act in the way that I can act, the way that I act, and as a way of developing resiliency. Because if I haven't said it before, like for me, rewilding is all about like being resilient and adapting. So I hope you've heard of, and if you haven't heard of, the vagus nerve. It's amazing, amazing, amazing ancient part of our body. So the vagus nerve, like vagus means wandering. So it's like at the back of our head, it travels up to our brain and right down to our colon. And this brain stem is 300 million years old. It's really, really, really old. So yeah, I think we kind of have to put some trust into it. And it's really like, so the limbic system is what helps us deal with stress. So it's the part of our body which engages the fight, flight, or freeze response. So the freeze response is actually the dorsal vagal, which is like much older again. And I just found out today that whales actually engage their dorsal vagal nerve when they're deep diving. So when they need to like really reduce the energy that their body's using as they do this deep dive, it's also in us as well. So yeah, like the dorsal vagal is kind of like when fight or flight doesn't work anymore, we can go into a freeze mode. So this is something that's really old, and when we respond to stress in our environment, we don't necessarily have a choice about how we react to it, but we can have an awareness about this response and what our learned responses are, and develop resiliency to move between these states of being. So you know, we can engage ourselves before we go into fight or flight, and help ourselves to move back up to what's known as the ventral vagal system. So the ventral vagal system is when you're feeling like got stuff together, like even it's not about like being calm or happy all the time, it's just about like your resiliency to respond to stressful situations. So we can, yeah, develop our capacity to move between those states of beings and to bring ourselves out of dorsal vagal freeze, shutdown. And we share this nervous system with all other mammals as well. So yeah, why this is important for me in rewilding is because for me, rewilding means coming back into our bodies and understanding our nervous system response and how we respond to stress, whether that's chronic stress caused by living in capitalism, caused by living in a system which doesn't value our innate bodily wisdom, which doesn't value our like wild state. And especially when we're looking at pictures of like negative human impact, it's like our bodies can respond by fight or flight or freeze, and so many people feel completely disempowered to change the things in the world because of this response system as well. So yeah, the vagus nerve, just to know, is also known as, like when we say trust your gut, it's like engaging our vagus nerve. So love to show you my favorite animal for demonstrating healthy nervous system regulation. And it's weird because these deer live across from my house and they're actually fenced in. It's not my choice, it's just the people who live here keep them as pets, and it's really odd for me as a rewilder to see like these beautiful wild animals in captivity. And it's a bit of a, yeah, whoa, some days, not great. But anyway, so these are deer. And if you've ever seen deer, whether they're in captivity or in the wild, they always display what's known as relaxed alertness. So they'll be eating the grass, and if you come along or if they smell you on the breeze, they'll automatically put their ears up. You know, they're really, really alert. But having said that, they can relax back into a state of just eating the grass, knowing that everything is okay. So we can kind of cultivate this sense of relaxed alertness in our own lives through a few different practices which are here. So one of them is called pronking, and this is actually an action that deer do. So you might see, if you ever watch a deer run away from you, sometimes it will pronk. So that means like it jumps up on its legs. It looks like it has springs on its feet. So pronking, and what that looks like in ourselves is like really vigorously shaking our bodies. So like trauma and traumatic situations can get trapped in the tissues of our bodies. So when we shake it out, I mean, you probably heard people say like shake it out. If we shake it out, we're like actively discharging that intense energy from our bodies. So that's one way of regulating your nervous system. And another way is through orientation. So orientation is where we let our eyes wander. And as we do that, we also move our neck. And when we move our neck, we're also stimulating our vagus nerve. So it's like really great practice for bringing yourself back into the present, into your body, noticing that there's no danger around, to regulate your own nervous system. So yeah, we can regulate our own nervous system through these actions, also through like self-soothing, whether it's like touching your arm or finding a way to soothe yourself. But we can also co-regulate, you know, in our relationships through cuddling, and with our wider communities through sharing how we're feeling. And also, like, it doesn't need to be just with other humans. So like I regularly co-regulate with other species. So whether it's like with a tree or with a plant, or if you have like a close relationship with an animal or a pet, co-regulation can go across species as well. And yeah, then like just working with our biology, so also known as self-care. But it's like, you know, taking a breath when you need to, taking some time out when you need to, going to the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom, just these really practical ways of taking care of ourselves that so often in our dominant culture doesn't feel acceptable. I'm thinking even with orientation, you know, like when your eyes wander around, it's like people think you're rude, you know, or like so much of our culture is set up where it's one person is teaching and you need to be like focused on them, when actually it's so much better if you're kind of taking it in while also regulating your own nervous system at the same time. So yeah, it's really, for me, I think it's like an act of really powerful resistance to civilization. Let me just see where I am. Yeah. So this is a quote from a man called Peter Michael Bauer, who is based in Portland, and his work in rewilding has just been really incredible. So I really, really appreciate it. And you can check out more of his stuff through Rewild Portland or Peter Michael Bauer, but he's been really at the forefront of kind of considering what rewilding is, especially in like cultural rewilding as well as ecological restoration. And the most recent quote and description that I've heard him come out with is, rewilding is living a life in service to the land and ecological community of your place. So as an example of that, we have the jay. So this is the Eurasian jay, and there's a lot of them here where I live. They're a sign of a really healthy woodland. They're quite rare, and they're always in the vicinity of oak trees. So the Latin name has garrulus in it, so it's like acorn is in the name. And what the jay will do is it will eat acorns, but it will cache some of them. And it will forget about where it's cached some. So as a result, oak trees will grow. So we don't really know if the jay is doing this intentionally or if it's just forgotten where it's planted the oak trees, but it seems like a really powerful symbol for rewilding and for ecological restoration. it's kind of nourishing itself and nourishing the wider ecosystem at the same time. So jays are amazing. So some of my, I guess this is my kind of guidelines for rewilding now, and the ways that I think we can do this, and it's like an ever expanding. So really welcome in the discussions after this, like if you have ways that you rewild your life, to share those. But one way I like to frame it is practices for becoming good ancestors. So for me, I mean, there's so many different ways that I consider this, like learning about my ancestors and connecting myself to the place where I come from. And then also like trying to live in a way where I feel like my ancestors might give a little sigh of relief each time. So yeah, for me, this also means living in a way that is reflective of a healthy ecosystem, of a healthy woodland. So knowing that death is only a beginning as well for so much life. And yeah, considering that time isn't linear as well, and that we live in cycles, just as the sun and the moon and menstruation and plants, everything's living in these cycles. So yeah, I guess it's kind of trying to, like, particularly in my business as well, this is something that's been really current for me at the moment, is thinking about how, you know, the capitalist mindset of growth is that like you're ever expanding and growing ever bigger, but we know that that's not what happens in the natural world, that there's this constant like constricting and expanding, you know, and there's spirals in and there's spirals out. So it's, yeah, it doesn't always need to be this linear mindset. So restorative community actions. So at the moment, you know, like our government's advice is to stay local, and I feel like that's so much more of a powerful statement than they maybe intend. So for me, like at this time, it's meant getting to know my neighbours, like both human and more than human, and like putting energy back into the community as well. So going to local farmers markets, doing projects that support the local community, like I'm doing some foraging projects and some zine projects. There's also an organisation in Ireland, I'm not sure how active they are anymore, but they used to be really active, and they're a group called Mountain Mihal. So Mihal being an Irish word for like the community coming together to do something, to shape it and to support it and to restore it. So they would go out and they would restore like mountain trails and paths, and it was like a community building process through restoring the ecology of the area. So that's really potent to rewilding, I think. Other ones like removal of invasive species, however whatever your attitude is towards that, it's essentially like trying to feed back into healthy ecosystems for the health of all of us. And this photo is just a picture of some acorns which are being processed for coffee and for flour. And it's from an event that I run with my friend Courtney called Feasting with the Ancestors. And for me, that's like, that weekend is an act of community restoration. So it's people coming together for 2 days to forage together, to cook together, to create ceremony together. And it should actually be the photo, but I forgot about it. There was a really lovely photo of the youngest participant, Bara, who was 4. A picture of him peeling acorns and his father sitting right behind him peeling acorns as well. So I just thought it encapsulated so beautifully for me what I wanted the event to be, which is like this cross-generational caring and tending to the land and to our communities. This is a photo from France. You would have seen it from the video. So yeah, I think for me what this photo represents is like rewilding in community through deep listening, through finding common ground with one another, through tending to our collective griefs, our individual griefs, and also like celebrating our collective joys and praises as well, and sharing food together. Just cooking and sharing food together, so important. Yeah, so nature connection practices are a big part of rewilding. They are like one part of the puzzle, I think. So probably one of the most well-known nature connection practices is that of a sit spot, and trying to like move and be more conscious of the limitations in my language. So recognizing that sit spot, like sitting, isn't accessible to everybody. So I've started, I'm toying around with different phrases, but wild listening spot is another name for this. And it's a really simple practice. It requires a little bit of dedication, and it's just that you find a spot close to your house, preferably, because if you pick a spot that's like maybe in a really beautiful, like ecologically diverse place, but if it's too far away, then you're going to be less likely to visit it every day. But it's to go to that spot like from between 5 minutes to half an hour. You know, you can build it into your life as you're able to, and just to get to know that place really well. It's kind of like that place becomes your friend, and through that, you know, conscious awareness, that like stepping into that space, you're there as an observer and also like taking your place in the web of life there. So you can do activities like engaging that wide-angled vision, of creeping into your spot to not disturb the birds or other creatures that might be there. You could do like some sound maps of the area or create a written map. Start to notice like what direction the wind's blowing from on certain days, what birds are visiting, what birds you can identify, any tracks that you can find on the ground. It's a really simple but expansive practice that I feel is accessible to many of us. Practice ancestral arts. Come to one of my classes. I taught an online fish skin tanning workshop the other week, which is amazing. I mean, I just thought it was hilarious, and my ancestors might have been having a good old laugh at how like this really ancient practice is now being taught over Zoom. But yeah, it's an amazing thing. So practice ancestral arts. So that could be through foraging, it could be through tracking, it could be through, whatever like you feel like your ancestors might have practiced, lighting a fire, working with wool, pottery, something, or woodwork, something that just engages you with the natural world. And you can start off really simple, you know, like find a plant in your area that you know to be edible or medicinal, and just get to know that plant really well. I love to suggest to people to start with something like nettle, as it's so abundant here, and just get to know it and kind of feel that ancestral muscle flexing in your body as you engage in something that's been practiced for thousands and thousands of years. And even like our body movements as we practice these, you know, it's really like in our bones. It is in our bones. Ritual. So this is a really important one for me personally, and something that it took me a really long time to come back to, having been raised Catholic and going to an all-girls Catholic school. I did not want to engage in ritual and ceremony for a very long time, and I still I mean, it's taken a lot of healing to come back to it again, to find the edges and I guess like approach ritual in a way that felt like I wasn't being a culturally appropriative. So I kind of keep things really simple now, and I mean, ritual can be as simple as like washing the dishes in an intentional way, or sitting and having your morning coffee with a tree. It doesn't need to be this grand gesture. It's the intention is the important part, really. So personally, I will follow the Celtic wheel now. So the next kind of big ritual for me will be summer solstice. But every day I have a ritual, particularly for doing Zoom calls. Like before this starts, I have my altar beside me. I'll keep the things that give me strength, that make me feel like in my own power. I'll burn some mugwort. I have a picture of my granny and granda, and I have a rose that I smell to kind of bring me back into my body. So it's kind of like, it's something to be really playful with. Yeah, people have different ways of engaging with it, so I'd love to hear if you have any. Gratitude. I'm going to take a drink of water. Yeah, that gratitude really changed my life. We practice gratitude every day before meal times whenever we were living outside, and it just kind of reframed how I thought about the world. I kind of realized that each day I was finding things that I was grateful for rather than looking for things that were wrong. And it might have been, there was a certain performative aspect to it, because we would go around the fire and everybody would say what they were grateful for. And, you wanted to have a really tasty bite, oh yeah. So you hear somebody's gratitude, it's like, oh, that's so nice. But having said that, you're still focusing on the positives. So yeah, and just to say, I'm not advocating that we need to be optimists or positive all the time, but it's just that engaging with okay, where am I at? What have I got? What is it in my life that's bringing me joy? And that might be grief, expression of grief, gratitude for that. But research has shown that gratitude, I'm reading now, that gratitude can improve general well-being, increase resilience, strengthen social relationships, reduce stress and depression. Play and rest. This is, gosh, I've forgotten his name. Samuel. Yeah, so I'm really lucky to work with children because they remind me of the importance of sacred play and of having a laugh, and also of resting as well. So yeah, play and take naps. I think that's a good part of rewilding. And naming and practicing the things that nourish you, feel the good as and when it happens. So this kind of comes back to our nervous system stuff again. So when we recognize and name and say the things that bring us pleasure, then it's we're able to kind of lock those in our minds as, okay, well, these are the things that bring me out of a state of fight or flight and bring me back into my body and back into the world. And it's weird to think of these as radical practices, but I really think they are, because dominant culture doesn't give us time for naps or for playing. And it's yeah, the emphasis is placed on working and success and just a little bit of time for self-care. But I think when we bring these practices into the center of our lives, which, I know that the coronavirus has brought so much pain, but a lot of people that I speak to also talk about this moment for stopping and taking stock of who they are and what they love and who and what nourishes them as well. So it's about finding ways to continue with that as we emerge out of this time. And yeah, I mean, a huge part of rewilding for me, and I would hope for anybody engaged in this practice, is to recognize the privileges that we have, and to fight for liberation for all humans and all species. It's been so incredibly inspiring to watch the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment, and yeah, I just feel like that's such an important part of rewilding, is that we're supporting the liberation of everybody in whatever way that we can. So this is from a t-shirt that I had printed with a friend, so it's direct provision. So if you haven't heard of direct provision, I would recommend that you go and find out what it is. And yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to Mary Reynolds as well, who's a rewilder in Ireland who focuses a lot on ecological restoration. So I guess my work focuses on the cultural and ecological restoration, but Mary has just used her voice to such amazing ends in getting people to just like rewild small parts of their garden or whatever it is. And she's coined this term, we are the ark. So encouraging acts of restorative kindness, which we always need more of. And thinking about, then I'm just finishing up here. So rewilding as a current practice. So when I have this conversation with people about rewilding, there's often a common misconception that we're looking to go back to the past, you know, and I suppose I don't help that by like dressing in buckskins or fox furs, but for me, those are the things that bring me joy in my life, is tanning and is living in this way, but that's not the only way to rewild. Like rewilding is about looking to the past to find solutions for our future and for the very real challenges that we as a species are facing. So I think it's around like, yeah, cultivating these practices in our life as a way of going into the future, and just recognizing that like we're birthing something new right now, and it's a really painful process and can take a lot of time, but it's beautiful. Like it's really beautiful work if we engage in it in this way. And I put a quote from, it's a bar in Belfast that I've never been in, but I always love the quote, which was, "A nation that keeps one eye on the past is wise, a nation that keeps two eyes on the past is blind." So yeah, that's kind of it. And just to finish with saying that like we all have the capacity to rewild our lives in whatever small way that feels right to us. There's no right or wrong way. And I feel like that we all have a birthright to live in healthy communities and ecosystems, and I'm really excited about doing more of it with you all. So Sinead, that's me. Oh yeah, last question. This is a question that I've been mulling over for a little while. And it's like considering like us as a human species, what is our ecological niche in the world? So thinking about like all animals are adapted to their place in the world. So we have a pine marten here, which is like one of our rarest wild mammals. And the pine marten has been like contributing to the health of ecosystems here by like hunting this invasive grey squirrel. And as a result, the native red squirrel is coming back. And we might have heard of stories of like when wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park, and it like literally changed the path of rivers. So it's just something that I would let you sit with to think about, like what our ecological niche is as humans. That's it. So there you are. I hope you enjoyed that. And I don't know if it was, yeah, I guess when I started preparing for this, it kind of took me on a journey that I didn't really think was going to happen, you know. But yeah, I welcome any questions that you have now. So if you feel like speaking them aloud, speak them aloud and maybe put a hand up, or else you can write them in the chat.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. That was brilliant. I really thoroughly enjoyed that. And it's really nice to get some practical ideas about rewilding your life. And I'm obsessively into rewilding. Mary Reynolds, I'm a huge fan. So it's nice to have the connection between the two aspects. And I've put it in the chats for everyone, but we interviewed Mary Reynolds a couple of weeks ago, and I'll have it on YouTube. When I get to the bottom of how to edit it, then it will be there.
Great. I'm also going to share some links in the chat as well.
Does anyone have any questions that they want to, or just to say that they want to, any things they want to share?
Hi Marianne, and hi
Hello.
Lucy. That was so good. Thank you guys so much for that. Lucy, I love your work. Every time I hear what you're doing, I'm so inspired. But I loved the video you showed us about your time in France, and I was just wondering a bit more about that, and like what level of rewilding did you have to be at, or did everyone have to be at before you could do an immersion like that?
Thanks, Jen. And yeah, just to let everybody know that Jen has an amazing, always inspired by Jen and her amazing connection to the ocean as well. She has a great, we are part of a community called People of Now and does events called Swimming into Connection. So yeah, we can maybe put a link for your work too, Jen. Yeah, so I suppose like the one thing that springs to my mind is like, I want to move away from this idea of like levels of rewilding, and that it's really like, but on a practical level, if you were doing a class of lynxes, she does week-long basic skills classes. So that covers like the basics of like fire, stone tools, foraging, tracking, hunting. Yeah, I think that's kind of it, and like group cooking. So she would normally ask that people do a week-long before they commit to doing something like a month-long or the 3-month-long. But like, I think like a big part of that as well is just to kind of, because like entering into a group like that for a month together, it was really intense, you know, and we often say that like the week-long is like the honeymoon period. You know, everybody's still really in love with each other, like there's no conflict. And then when you get into 2 weeks, then like the wee niggly conflicts start to arise, and it's like you really get into that space of like, well, how do we, you know, how do we resolve this, and how do we move forward? So yeah, I mean, if you were to do one of hers, it would be a week-long. But when I do a month-long, you can come. It's fine.
Sorted. I've got the loophole now.
Yeah, you're in. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's funny because like I always think back to those, and it's never the skills that I remember, you know, it's like, yeah, it's like, oh, we made a basket or we tend to hide, but like the things that I remember is like, you know, our grief ceremonies and the difficult things that we navigated together and the beautiful words that people shared. It's like, it's so much about learning how to be human again, you know. That's what I feel.
Stunning. Thanks so much, and thank you so much for what you shared about the vagus nerve and then the whales and how they dive and their door. That was so cool. I was like,
beautiful. Yeah, the whole polyvagal theory thing, it feels like it's everywhere for me at the moment that I look, and it just seems so important to the work that we're both doing, you know. And I just would love, like, I have friends who work in a school and they have like this song that they teach the kids about their brain, and I think if we all had a better understanding of neuroscience and nervous system like response from a young age, it would be so beautiful. Yeah. Definitely. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lucy.
Anyone else with any comments or thoughts? I think you've like everyone's stunned. They're like, oh, how can I bring this into my life?
There's a lot of, I brought you to a lot of places, so I thank you for sticking with me in it, because yeah, I think we could have done like an hour on each slide, you know.
Well, it's a really nice taster though, just of what, you know, of a different perspective of things, which I love. And I really like the I always use the sit spot. Jen and I did that on our permaculture course, and I have used that a lot since as a really useful practice. But I hadn't, yeah, that was a nice idea. I was wondering if you'd expand a bit more on ancestral skills that, you know, that would be easily accessible, or where you might go to learn more information about how to get started.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are people who are coming from different countries now, so I guess like it's, you know, there's like a shared, we all have a shared ancestry, right? You know, so like a lot of the skills that I'm practicing is like going back to Stone Age skills, to like our common threads. So like a lot of that will be, you know, making fire, with sticks or foraging for food or tanning hides and making tools. So you can come on one of my classes.
Excellent, I'd love to. Maybe not the tanning, but yeah, the tool making maybe.
Yeah. Well, I work a lot out of the Phoenix Park in Dublin, but I also work all around the country. So I work in the Mournes with Field Studies Council quite a bit. I work down in Wexford at the National Heritage Park. I work up in Donegal, and yeah, I travel around a lot.
You're just going to have to come to Cloney and come and do a course with us, you know.
I'd love to. Yeah,
Perfect.
I'd love to.
We'll do that then.
Yeah, that would be beautiful. But yeah, I mean, I suppose there's so many different ways into ancestral arts, and you know, some people will, you know, look back to what their own ancestors were practicing not that long ago. So maybe they were worked in the linen industry. Maybe they worked, like I know some of my ancestors were saddlers. But like, it's just like the skills are one part, you know. You could also look at like the ancestral foods of your land as well, like what were your ancestors eating, what was your granny cooking, you know. It's like all these ways of just like re-engaging with our roots and yeah, that feeling of belonging essentially. Cool. Yeah, Patricia, I've linked Peter's podcast there, so we did an episode together which is on there, but his work's really inspirational. Yeah, pronking's amazing. It feels good to do it as well, and I find it interesting that it was something that I see we so naturally do. So it's like always about coming back to that kind of innate wisdom of our bodies and trusting that we know what to do. Because like 300 million years old, that's a really long time for a system to exist in ourselves.
Well, it's a fascinating idea, and I think it's so important to us to realise that we're part of a web and not just in isolation. You know, and I think there needs to, you know, I really appreciate you talking about that today, and because I think that so often we're so unaware that we're part of a bigger system and a history, and we tend to look at the very narrow focus. You know, the shifting baseline syndrome, the system, you know, the problem that we always consider ourselves to be of the now, and you've just shown us no, we're not, you know, and our whole system is designed from long ago.
Yeah, and I mean, I've had those experiences where I've practiced a skill, or it happened really, really strongly when I was up in Sweden, and it was after living outside up there for 3 months, and I was gathering moss for, like, we were thatching a shelter, and I just knew that I'd done it before. It was just like this overwhelming feeling of like, this is so familiar to me, you know. It was like I knew where to go for the best moss, and I was like my ancestors were moss gatherers, so like we know about trauma, like living in the body, you know, like we're really aware now of how trauma is passed down through generations. So I think like those good things can live in us as well. Any resources you would recommend for finding more about ancestral foods in Ireland? I'd be interested in learning more about this. My mum has a book, I'm not sure what it's called, but maybe if you look on Book Depository, it might be like Ancestral Foods of Ireland. I want to actually show you a book. Give me a second.
I love this about Zoom, that there's this opportunity to just go and like, right, I'm just going to rummage on my bookshelf. It's really nice. And because I'm a librarian most of the time, but I can never remember the titles of the books. It's a terrible thing to admit. So it's quite useful. Although I do usually start with the book is pink. Yeah, Nina knows what I'm talking about.
I'll just plug you back in. Okay, so this is like my Bible. So this is a book called Ireland's Generous Nature. by Peter Wise Jackson. So Peter Wise Jackson worked in the Botanic Gardens in Dublin, and this is like a complete ethnobotany of Ireland, and it's just like the most comprehensive book I've ever read, and it's so beautiful. And he goes through so many plants and like the indigenous Irish names of the plants from different areas, as well as if they're used for food, medicine, textiles, dye, children's games, veterinary practices, rope, musical instrument making. Yeah, it's astounding, really, like that he's done this. It's so beautiful. And then another one, if you're into like basket making, is one that I love, is Basket Making by Joe Hogan. So Joe Hogan lives out in Connemara, and is, suppose, like one of our best known basket weavers. Yeah, it's just baskets, really. But it's I just picked it up because I saw it there. But it's a really beautiful one.
But that is a very accessible skill, isn't it? There's a lot of that around.
Yeah, I mean, it is and it isn't. It's accessible in that there's a lot of people teaching it, and there are a lot of people learning it. But to try and get started yourself basket weaving is hard, because you need to get willow, and a lot of the willow in Ireland, like there's nobody selling commercially. People ship it over from England, so you just have to find a source of willow. But then there's like, if you learn the principles of basket making, there's lots of things that you can harvest from the wild, like brambles and ivy and hazel and different vines as well. So I'm just gonna read it. Sorry, Demi's just sharing that reminds them that we all have ancestors who create things from the ground and respect the nature. And that was like really when Sarah talks about the clay, you know, like we had to, it was a really amazing process, because we had to crawl into this cave, and it was like a tiny little crawl space, and we were crawling with a little fat lamp that was made of clay, that was fueled by fat from the sheep that we were eating, with like, you know, a little bit of wick. We had to crawl through this like tiny little cave entrance to the back of the cave, which was maybe like 10 meters in, and then scrape the clay from there. And then, you know, you're taking this ball of clay and then you make it into a pot, and then you need to make your fire with these sticks, and then you make a fire, and then suddenly you have a pot that you can use to then go and gather your water, or like to make another fat lamp to go and get more clay. And it's like the circularity of all of these crafts I find really, really beautiful. I mean, I feel like people like just need to come and experience it, because there's so many different threads with it. Like if I'm, you know, want to go and catch a fish, it's like, well, I need to know how to make my line, I need to know like where to fish, and then I catch my fish, I need some kind of cutting blade for cutting it, then I can tan the skin, and there's so many different threads to follow with all of it. And our ancestors knew it all, you know, and we've lost.
Yeah, that's the thing I find, that we've lost so much skill, and that we've become, you know, we're so disempowered because we don't have this knowledge.
Yeah.
And it feels like, you know, for the pod project, for me anyway, it has been it's just about learning, and it's just but I feel like a slight disadvantage in my midlife, that I'm then having to learn skills that my ancestors would have known from the beginning.
Yeah, there's a lot of grief comes up with it, I think, you know, because we understand how much we've lost, and then like this, you know, this thing that I shared about, like, you know, in sort of capitalist system, it's like time is linear, and it doesn't take into account like all the indigenous cultures that see time as circular and these different ways of experiencing time, but that like we're on this trajectory and we've only been getting better. It's like, it's total shit, like, you know, it's like how how can we say that we've gotten better when we've extracted so much of the resources from the earth, that so many people live in poverty, that we've so many different systems of oppression that we have to navigate? Like, it's like we need, it's a myth, you know, and it's one that does us like so much disservice. Reading myths so is another great way of rewilding, because there's so many archetypes that are pan-cultural and universal and span time as well. So I would recommend reading myths.
I think that's as in reading a book on myths in general, or just have you got one you'd recommend?
I suppose in Ireland we have like the different cycles. So we have like the Ulster cycle, the Fenian cycle. So these are our myths, but then there's one person I would recommend checking out is Sharon Blackie, who's an amazing author who it's kind of like a Celtic women who run with the wolves, and she writes a lot about myths of like the archetypal female. And then Martin Shaw as well, and he's been sharing a lot of stories online. Hey, you've got it. Martin Shaw has been sharing a lot of myths online, so he has a myth school based in Devon. And then Eddie Lenihan as well, like one of our most well-known Shanachis in Ireland. And I feel like there's a woman in Banbridge as well who's an amazing storyteller. I can't remember her name. If I do, I'll send it on. But essentially it's like in myths there are these archetypal figures which represent our psyches, you know, and sort of if we're recognizing that it's not like we're not the first manifestation of ourselves, you know, we're unique and we're not at the same time, and we have these different characters and archetypes that appear in our life over time. So I just think it connects us to something bigger as well.
I think it's I was just going to say, it's so important to have an opportunity for conversations like that, because it's so easy to just to be part of the status quo, and then, you know, you need opportunities to share and talk about these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, there was
just a question from Peter. Could you say a little about the connection you see between rewilding and protest, for example, and direct provision? Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I mean, so like the concept of rewilding came out of the anarcho-primitivist movement in the 70s, I believe. It first appeared in a Green Anarchy magazine. So at its root, it's like an anarchist concept. Anarcho-primitivism is now known as primal anarchy because of the strong connotations around the word primitive, which I don't use in my work. And yeah, then it came into like the ecological realm after that. And now there's like so much confusion about what rewilding is. Like I see people trying to sell mattresses that talk about rewilding, and I'm just like, this like totally missed the point, but that's capitalism. So yeah, I mean, for me, like rewilding is about creating resilient communities. And I don't see us being able to create resilient communities if there are still people who are being oppressed in the world. So like direct provision being one example, which was a system that was set up in Ireland in 1999 as a temporary measure for putting asylum seekers in camps, essentially. And there's some variation of this which exists in pretty much every country, you know, where, you know, people who are not white who enter a country and are treated so much differently than people who are white, or are white passing, as we say. So yeah, like I guess for me, like rewilding is about liberation, and if we bring it back to our ecosystems, like we know that an ecosystem is healthy when it's diverse and when it has lots of edges, and those edges are healthy and thriving. And the people who are at the edges of our society now, so people of colour, Indigenous people, travellers, Asian, minority ethnics, people in the LGBTQI plus communities, like I could go on. The people who have had to navigate these edges are the people that we should be listening to, because they're the people that know how to survive in really adverse conditions and how to adapt and that's what we need to do through rewilding, because this isn't working anymore, you know, like we know it's not working, and we feel it in our bones and we feel it in our nervous systems. It's like we're not well, and I think centering these voices and listening to these people is fundamental to rewilding. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. It's really important to have that as part of the conversation too. It's been obviously a really difficult few weeks, really, hasn't it? And I think, yeah, well, as Jackie said, good thoughts.
Yeah, but it's so much about how we put it into action now as well, isn't it? And I don't know about all of you, but I've had a couple of weeks of hard, uncomfortable conversations with people I love, you know, and it's just like the tip of what I can do, you know. But it's just so amazing that the conversations are happening, and that it is in the mainstream media now, you know, and I'm just so grateful to the people who are still attending protests, that are still keeping up the momentum, so that we can all experience a world beyond capitalism and white supremacy, because that would be just wonderful to live in.
Yeah, I'm with you. I vote for that. Please, can I vote for that? Yeah, I'm really interested about what we do next and how we keep this momentum, like, you know, with this movement, and with all that's going on with global warming and with this virus, which is definitely a wake-up call, surely, to all of us, that we need to do something. So I'm really interested in how we do that. I mean, we suggested having online conversations with people about how we do it. I mean, I don't know, have you drawn any conclusions yourself about this?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Drawn any conclusions about what?
About what to do, where to go next. I mean, you know, have you had any thoughts on that? I've had lots. Not very helpful, but I've had a lot of thoughts.
Do you mean particularly around engaging like anti-racism and anti-oppression work, or? Yeah,
and also from, you know, not being part of a capitalist society, how we progress it to the next point.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation with a person in Scotland, and their name is Eleanor Prindada. Let me just check if I can find their name. There they are. So Eleanor is, I believe it's their master's or some PhD, but they're aiming to have 100 conversations with people about business beyond capitalism is the theme of the talk. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, I need to have a conversation with this person. And you know, like, the biggest thing that I took away from it was what I said about like business not needing to be like exponential growth, you know, and business can reflect the natural cycles that we live in. And a big part of that then reflects back onto like, well, how do I feed myself? How do I clothe myself? How do I interact with my community? Like, how can I live in a way where I don't require as much money? And I mean, I think what's more interesting is to think about like how to make that accessible for lots of people, because that's really accessible to me as a white middle class woman. I don't have the answers right now. I mean, I always do sliding scale on my events, and I'm realizing the importance now of like actively reaching out to other communities to have more people from diverse ethnic backgrounds accessing this knowledge and these skills, and empowering them to, you know, to create these things for themselves as well. It's like, I suppose I think I thought before it was like okay for me just to have like some people from those communities in my workshops, but now I'm like, no, these people need to be leading the workshop. So trying to think about like, well, how can I support people to get the training, or to be a bigger part of this work. Secret economic. Charles Eisenstein, his essays over this past coronavirus have been incredible. They've been so great. Yeah, the bits I could understand. Yeah, I kind of zone in and out of concentration on them, but I'm like, this feels good. Yeah. Charles Eisenstein's written a couple of essays, Secret Economics. Thank you for recommending that. Great, I'll look into that more. Thank you, Nina. Yeah, it's just great to have the conversations. And I mean, I think what you're doing with the pod project is incredible. You know, we like to have such a community orientated project that's all about creating like healthy, resilient communities.
Thank you.
Yeah, what we can do.
Well, you know, it's just, I think, you know, it's about learning, isn't it? And it's making it things affordable. You know, this started because everything we looked at was so expensive to participate in it. And actually we wanted to, you know, if everyone needs to be part of the journey, everyone needs to be part of the journey. Otherwise, you know, we can't make a difference.
Yeah.
Peacocks ending nicely.
It's like the 9:30 call.
Yeah. Well, does anyone else have any other thoughts or comments they want to make before you finish up? Or, I mean, it just was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. Such a different perspective. Well, I kind of said what I'd been wanting to say, but hadn't articulated, so it's brilliant.
Thank you, and thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I've really appreciated getting to speak about all of this. Thank you.
Well, I hope we get to do some work in the future going forward, and you know, when we're allowed face-to-face actions, we'll keep doing this sort of environment.
Yeah.
Maybe as Jen, you have to talk next about her work. She's laughing, but yeah, I think it's really nice to have all these different perspectives. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody for turning up, and thank you Marianne for asking me to be a part of this. And yeah, if you know, I'm Wild Awake on Facebook, Wild Awake Ireland on Instagram, and wildawake.ie is my website, so any classes that I'll be doing at some time will be going up there. And I really hope to meet you all and maybe see those people in California next year.
Yeah, I know, that was really exciting. Well, we got Erin and Joe next week on there, so they're there as well. Hi, Erin. They're from the Edible Flower, and they're talking.
Oh, that's you. Great.
Yeah, that's the Edible Flower. There you go. Introduced via Zoom.
Lovely to have you here. Love your work. Great. Okay. Well, we'll say
you so much.
Good night to you all, and thank you very much. Take care.
Good night, everybody. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.